Pray with me. Gracious God, either through me or in spite of me, may your word be proclaimed, and may hearts receive that word with rejoicing from within. Pray this in the name of Christ, our Savior. Amen. I'll read to you, I think it's one of the memorable miracles in the Gospels. And with John, the Gospel of John's where I'll be reading. There's a lot of detail. It's this picture that he paints that is just so cool. It's going to be Gospel of John, chapter 9, starting at verse 1. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, is this the man? Is this the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, it is he. Others were saying, no, but it is someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. And then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, well, where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, well, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, well, he is a prophet. Now we move down to verse 28. Then they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us? And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Jesus said, I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees heard this, and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." A traveler was found by a U.S. custom official to be carrying half a bottle full of liquid from Mexico. The official asked the man what it contained, and the traveler replied, "Oh, it's just holy water. I took it from the shrine I visited in Mexico. They say it causes miracles. We'll see." So the inspector was suspicious and opened the bottle and took a sniff. And he shouted, "This isn't holy water, it's tequila." So the traveler lifted his eyes to the sky and cried out, "Good heavens, another miracle!" Jesus and his disciples came upon, as the story goes, a man born blind. In verse 2 of chapter 9 that I read from John, his disciples asked him, "Who sinned, Lord?" "Rabbi, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" The cultural and religious understanding of that time was that there was a cause for such a departure from the norm. It would be normal for a child to be born with the ability to see, right? A normal understanding of the time was that God brought the blindness upon the man because of sin. His disciples bore this out by their question that they asked, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" To have such an understanding of human suffering, honest to goodness, it would answer many questions and really assist those with the responsibility to teach about the will and the ways of God. What about the sick and the suffering? Well, it's God's will being done. Look upon God's will. What about the healthy and prosperous? Well, look at what God is doing. Isn't it marvelous? See, wouldn't that be easy? Wouldn't that be simple? The preacher was sitting on his front porch watching his neighbor pass by, leading his horse. The preacher called out, "What are you going to do with your horse today?" The man said, "I'm going to town to sell it." Well, the pastor said, sitting on his porch, we often do, not really, "You ought to say you're going to sell it if it be the Lord's will." Well, the man said, "Well, what does this have to do with the Lord's will? Honestly, this is a good, healthy horse. You know, honest to goodness, I have raised it specifically to be sold. I've even gotten a buyer for it. Honest to goodness, the Lord's will won't change anything." There he goes with his horse. Later that day, the neighbor passed by the preacher's house going the other way by himself. And he was covered in dirt. His clothes were ripped to pieces, and he was sore from one end to the other. And the astonished preacher, again sitting on his porch, asked, "What happened?" The man said, "Well, I talked to you so long earlier that I was late for my appointment with my buyer. Well, to get there on time, because I think I still had time to get there. Honest to goodness, I cut through and tried to make a shortcut across a cornfield owned by a cross old buzzard down the road a piece. Well, he saw me tramping through his field with my horse, and he took a gun and he started shooting at me. Well, the horse panicked, and the horse tripped and fell over on me. And then he kicked me in the head, and trying to get out from under the horse, I tore my clothes all to pieces, and I ran like crazy to get out of range of the old man and his gun, and I ran smack dab into a barbed wire fence, and that's what happened to me." The preacher asked, "Well, where are you going now?" He said, well, the man answered, well, I'm going home now, if it be the Lord's will. In this story from John, Jesus didn't entertain the disciples' question about who sinned. It's not how he answered them. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him, Jesus said. It was a departure from the normal for anyone to say someone suffered from blindness so that God's works might be revealed in him. That's a departure from the norm. It was normal for people to be labeled in Jesus' day as sinners for what they were suffering, but abnormal to be described as non-sinners while still suffering. Everything Jesus does in this story from John 9 is a departure from the norm. Everything. He was the one who declared, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world, he says in verse 5. It was a departure from the normal for anyone to say they were the light of the world. Jesus said to the Pharisees in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. After he entered into Jerusalem, for the last time in John, the 12th chapter, he said, I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in darkness. Again, in John 9, as I was telling Bella, and Bella's going, ooh, nasty. He spit on the ground, he made mud, and he spread it on the man's eyes and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. He went and washed and came back able to see. The blind cannot perceive light. Well, I guess in this day and age we would say depending on the severity of the blindness. And those with sight can see light physiologically. I mean, it's a physiological reality. Now, this is normal. This is normal. In this miracle, Jesus showed himself to truly be the light of the world for those who were blind. This man could not see lest Jesus intervened. And it's interesting in this story, too, that in this story, this guy doesn't ask to be healed of blindness. He doesn't cry out. There are other stories. Blind Bartimaeus on the road to Jericho or Jerusalem, he says, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, it makes a big brouhaha on the road. And they tell him to shush, be quiet. And then Jesus says, come up here and bring him up here. That's not the story. This story is different. This guy doesn't even know Jesus is there. If he even know who Jesus is at all. But as Jesus himself shows himself to be truly the light of the world for those who were blind. And perhaps, honest to goodness, brothers and sisters, perhaps he was offering, even in that moment, even in this day and age as we read this story, he was offering a new normal. A new normal. As the story continued, people sought to understand what exactly had happened to this guy. If this is actually the guy that was begging, the blind man who was begging, the normal was disturbed. So there are people that are trying to make sense of it. Well, what really did happen? What happened? Who healed you? What? Can you see? Really? Are you the guy that was sitting? Maybe he's not. Maybe he is. I don't know. You think it looks like him? Maybe it looks like him. I don't know. They're all trying to figure it out. Because the normal for their lives has been disturbed. Things have changed. This is the man who used to sit and beg. They kept asking him, how then were your eyes open? Where's the man who opened your eyes? The Pharisees asked the man some of the same questions. But they were also looking for reasons to indict Jesus for healing on the Sabbath. That was the big boogaboo. When did he do this? Did on Sabbath. No work on the Sabbath. How dare he do any work? Make some mud and spray on somebody's eyes so they heal. So they're healed so that they have sight like they've never had before. Their lives are totally changed, just dramatically, to the point where all of our jaws drop open. It's work. No work should have been done. See, as we read this and as we hear this, even today, we ought to be, these people are nuts. These people are worried about what? The Sabbath. This guy has sight. This guy has changed, outrageously changed by this itinerant, wow. Pharisees want to indict him because he violated the law. They're looking for reasons to indict him. Not only is that not normal, it violates the law. And a sinner not performing signs and miracles, that would be normal. We hear that discussed too. But this man received his sight. That's not normal. It was the first day of school. Due to a staffing shortage, an elderly principal had been called out of retirement to fill in temporarily in this particular school to be principal again. And that wasn't normal nor ordinary, but you got to do what you got to do. As the principal made his rounds early in the school day, which was normal, he heard a terrible commotion in one of the classrooms, which wasn't normal. So he rushed into the classroom and spotted the tall boy who seemed to be making the most noise, and he seized the boy by the arm and took him out into the hallway and pushed him up against the wall and told him to wait there until he was excused. That's probably normal. Then the old principal goes into the classroom and restored order, and then launched into a half-hour lecture and discussion about the fact how important it was for good behavior in classrooms. Now, he said, are there any questions? One girl raised her hand and said, "Sir," she asked timidly, "may we now have our teacher back, please?" He's the one in the hallway. And that wasn't a normal question. The man healed of his blindness told the Pharisees, "Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind." If this man, this Jesus, were not from God, he could do nothing. The healing of someone born blind was unprecedented. Never before. A departure from the norm. Jesus' affiliation with God, therefore, makes it possible for him to do anything. As we hear this story, as we read this story, that ought to be one of the things that comes to our mind. This Jesus can do anything. What does that tell us? Truly, our affiliation with Jesus puts us then on the cusp of what? A new normal. A new normal is a departure from the old normal. Well, what's the old normal? The old normal is characterized by blind beggars. The old normal is characterized by hopeless Samaritan women living in the shadows. The old normal is legalistic religion that segregates people into untrustworthy sinners on this side and legally bound ritual observers on the other side, while the truth of God's love and power for all is ignored or forgotten. That, among other things, is the old normal. Then there are the few. Who dare to read or hear the words of Jesus or the stories of Jesus. These few realize it's Jesus who doesn't defend the norms of a broken society or a corrupted religious system. He is the departure from the norm. He's the odd one. He's the one who talks to a woman who comes to the well at noon when no one else is there and dares to speak to her, and eventually changes her life forever. He's the one who sees the lost or forgotten and brings them light and life and hope and opportunities to join the few who know his words and trust his actions for all of us, yes, for all the world. The former blind beggar, as the story concludes, is cast out. Where's he cast out of? He's cast out of the temple. Never to return. You're not welcome here anymore, apostate. Utterly ostracized by the corrupted religious system that sought to indict the light of the world as a sinner deserving punishment. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. And then some of those Pharisees, as the story goes, the defenders of the faith, nearby commented that they weren't among the blind. Surely not us. Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin. Whew, that's a statement. But now that you say, well, we see, your sin remains. Well, it's better to be blind. It's better to be blind. It's better to be like the beggar outside the temple, who doesn't try to figure out how to mold Jesus. Try to figure out how to mold Jesus into his or her religious system of do's and don'ts. Who tries to make excuses for our religious institutions for not loving our neighbors as ourselves. It's better to come to the dawning realization of the prevenient grace of God, who goes out ahead of us, wooing us to trust in the amazing grace of God that saves a wretch like me. It's better to stumble upon that God of grace and mercy, truth and love, who communicates to the blind and the beggars among us that all is forgiven, and the life eternal is yours in Jesus Christ. It's better to come upon one of the few who lovingly accepts and recognizes us as we are and freely shares with us the love of God in simple deeds and words wherever they might find us. It's better to be embraced by those who depart from the norm, cross the tracks, open the doors, and invite us in. In other words, it all comes down to this. It's better to be with Jesus. It's better to be with Jesus. I prefer his company. I prefer his love. I prefer his laughter. I prefer his stares than anybody else's. I prefer his questions. I prefer his leading. I prefer him loving me as he finds me. Because I know things are going to change. Why? Because he's with me and I'm with him. You're with him and he's with you. We're with him and he's with us. It's better to be with Jesus.